Today, the Supreme Court will consider the case of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, who the Trump administration attempted to fire from her post. So far, Cook has been allowed to continue serving in her position while litigation proceeds. It's the first time in the Fed's 112-year history that a president has tried to fire a sitting governor. I want to bring in our expert panel now to break down this case. CBS News contributor Jessica Levinson is here on the potential legal implications, and geoeconomics correspondent Erin Delmore is back to break down the potential economic fallout from all of this. So Jessica, first to you. Lisa Cook's lawyers, first of all, we should again point out that this is the first time that this is happening in the 110-plus year history of the Federal Reserve, since it was created back in 1913, right? But her lawyers, Lisa Cook's lawyers, are arguing that she was denied a notice and a hearing before she was attempted to be removed, which violates the Constitution's Fifth Amendment protections. Now, what happened when the lower courts heard that argument?
Well, the lower courts found that, in fact, that she should be reinstated and that there was an issue here of due process. And I think that what you've zeroed in on is exactly what the court is talking about right now. So we know that we're talking about the Federal Reserve Act, and we're talking about the requirement that the president cannot remove one of the 7 members of the Board of Governors unless there is cause. There's that for-cause requirement. Now, the Trump administration isn't challenging the for-cause requirement. They're essentially challenging what is included within it. And what Lisa Cook is arguing is, one, it can't be allegations, in this case mortgage fraud, of things that occurred before she was in office. 2, as you said, this issue of due process. And what you hear the justice is saying is, well, if a president doesn't have to say, here's your notice of why we think there's cause, here's your opportunity to be heard, here's your opportunity, meaning to contest, that's your due process, then this for-cause requirement really doesn't do a lot of work at all. And then finally, Vlad, there's the question is whether or not, and you just heard the Chief Justice asking about this, whether or not judges have any ability to weigh in here and say, that's not for cause and she should be reinstated.
So let me play devil's advocate, Jessica, and then ask you then, does the president not have broad executive power that has been defined over the course of our republic to oversee and remove executive officers, which is a core part of Article 2 of the Constitution, if I'm not mistaken?
You are right, absolutely. And what's really interesting here, I'll just zero in on this. Recently, in one of these shadow docket or rocket docket decisions, when the court was talking about firing a member of a different agency, I believe it was the NLRB in that case, they said, well, of course the Fed is different. So Vlad, to your point about the president having power over how to organize the executive branch, who to hire, who to fire, absolutely enormous power. But what we hear the justices acknowledging in that order, and then again today, is there's something different about the Fed. We want the Fed to have more independence and therefore maybe more separation from the president. As we know, the Board of Governors, these members, they are nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and they serve staggered terms. Like in every way, we're trying to say, let's put some distance between whoever is in the Oval Office. This is not about President Trump. It's about a president and members of the board so that they can set monetary policy without too much political pressure.
So let's talk about that, Erin. That is a core sort of purpose of the Federal Reserve, is it's meant to be insulated from any kind of political pressure. The point being, it is meant to ensure sound monetary policy. If something like this were to occur, how destabilizing could it be to the markets and to the economy overall?
We would surely see markets react. And in fact, we've seen the markets react step by step as President Trump has fired warning shots at Jerome Powell, who's the chair of the central bank. Now, that kind of independence has just been enshrined in what is the central bank, what is the Fed. It is different from other entities. And when we see the president making this kind of case, that he can fire someone for cause, it leads to the assumption that he might be able, if a ruling comes down in a certain way, to fire people at will. That would really impede the perceived independence or the insulation of the central bank. Now, people count on that. When we look at Wall Street, investors here count on the central bank making decisions based on data, based on numbers, based on policy, what it sees in terms of inflation falling. That's one of the Fed's targets. And also the job market remaining robust and resilient. And in fact, when Jerome Powell came out talking on a video recently, he was saying that this is pretextual. President Trump, he said, the case coming with charges at the department, he said was a pretext. And that's also the same word that we're seeing Lisa Cook's lawyers use here.
Right. She hasn't been charged with anything. And as Jessica pointed out, it happened before she was even a Fed chair.
Correct.
Or a Fed governor.
That's why this case has implications beyond just the Fed. It's about presidential power, which, Vlad, is not unlike the Supreme Court case that we're seeing on tariffs. It's also about what kind of power the executive branch holds. So this could have reverberations in other parts of government, in other entities, far beyond Lisa Cook and beyond the Fed in general. But surely when we see this decision come down, we'll see a reaction in the market either way, because the market has shown over and over that investors are looking for independence for the central bank.
Jessica, so to that end, it's not only the argument that Erin is making, which is the impartiality of the Federal Reserve, the notion that Lisa Cook has these allegations are just that. No criminal charges have been filed, and they're using these allegations as a pretext.
Well, that's right. And I think that goes to the question of basically how much work does that for-cause standard do? Now, Lisa Cook, we should be very clear, is denying all wrongdoing. And the Trump administration is being pushed as we speak right now on basically what fills up that definition of for cause. Do you need to show that there is the likelihood of some fraud? And as we talked about, does it need to be based on things that you did while in office? Cook is saying this is really about malfeasance of members of the Board of Governors while they are doing their jobs. It's not about alleged wrongdoing prior to ever taking that public office. What you're also hearing, I heard Chief Justice John Roberts very briefly before we started talking, Vlad, say essentially, what if this was an inadvertent mistake and the president doesn't like it? Is that enough for cause? What we have is the justice is really trying to, as you said, this is a historic historic first, pushing on this question of how much pressure does the for cause standard put on the president to come up with a good or real reason? And how much is it just there as essentially a flimsy promise that there be some independence?
Jessica, before I let you go and before Erin, you go, just really quickly, because it's something that I've been thinking about. And me and my little brain, I don't know if Gen Xers will know that great series of books by John Fitzgerald, but me and my little brain are trying to understand. And so this may be a dumb question, but if the president is able to fire a Fed governor, and that decision cannot be reviewed, what kind of statutory protections does that mean for Fed independence? And could that mean then that the president could fire a Supreme Court justice?
So, as always, this is actually a huge question. If we could have another hour to discuss it, that would be great. So I will say just very briefly, I think we need to look at the Fed and the fact that the Fed is organized under the executive branch. It's a quasi-independent agency, as different from Supreme Court justices. As Erin was talking about, does this case bring up questions of executive power, particularly over the executive branch? Absolutely. But I want to, Vlad, focus in on that over the executive branch. What you asked about is a different branch, the judicial branch, Supreme Court justices. At this point, we have a different framework. I think we always will, which is that they can only be removed if there's some sort of impeachment proceeding. And as we know, that is exceedingly rare for any federal judge.
All right. Really great discussion. As always, Jessica Levinson, Erin Delmore, thank you so much for joining us. That was awesome. Appreciate you guys.